All right, so I just finished doing this little experiment here with olive oil and table syrup. So I measured out 250 milliliters of olive oil, and the mass that I measured on the scale was 353. That had the cup included, so I had to subtract this mass of the cup, and I ended up with 233. Following the same pattern, to find this last column, I took the second last column and divided it by this second column. And I ended up with 0.932 grams per milliliter. Grams divided by milliliters, that's where we get our unit, gram divided by milliliter. I did it again with 500 milliliters of olive oil, and I ended up measuring the mass with my scale, 582, subtract that 120, which is 462. 462 divided by 500 was 0.924. Okay, so to find the average of these, I'm going to add them together and divide by 2, and I found the average, the mean, was 0.928 grams per milliliter. And then I chose table syrup. Remember, you could have chosen your own things for these other two. Do water, but you could have chosen these other things. If you chose these same things, you could then compare to my values and see what you get. I did the same thing, 250 milliliters with table syrup. It weighed 466 grams. Subtract the 120, that's the thing I was measuring it in, the measuring cup, and I ended up that the syrup itself weighed 346 grams. Take that, divide by 250, it's 1.384, and do that all again with 500 milliliters, and we ended up with 1.36 grams per milliliter. Add those up, divide by 2, it's 1.372 grams per milliliter. Okay, so that's what I got for question 1. Question 2 says look up the densities. So I went online and I said, what's the density of water? And it told me it's 1 gram per milliliter. I looked up what is the density of olive oil, and it said 0.92 grams per milliliter. So I wrote that down here. And table syrup I looked up, and it said it was 1.37 grams per milliliter for a certain brand of table syrup that I used. Sometimes the brands will be a little bit different. They'll be really close though. So now we need to compare the values. It says compare the value for water. So 0.995 is 5/1000ths less than 1, right? It's really close to 1. You'd say that this one was a lot closer to this than it was to these other values, right? Olive oil was 0.928. What was the actual value? And if you look it up, 0.92. Those are really close. That's 8/1000ths off. And then here, this is only 2/1000ths off. These are so similar. So what does that tell you about your mass volume ratio and your density? It tells you that mass divided volume is your density. So if you take mass divided by volume, that will give you your density. So if you know the density of something, if you want to figure out the mass, but you only have something that measures the volume, you could actually just measure the volume and use the density that you know in order to calculate it. So let's add one more question here. For example here, what mass would 350 milliliters of water have? Well, we know that the density of water is 1. We know it's 1 gram per milliliter, and we know that 1 gram per milliliter would be our mass divided by volume, our mass divided by our volume, which is the thing we don't know. Sorry, I had these upside down. So what number divided by 350 would give you 1? Well, we know that it would be the same number. But when it's not so easy, when it's not such an easy number here, we need to do use our math, where we know if we divide by 350, to get rid of that, we can multiply both sides by 350. We can multiply both sides of the equation by 350. These two cancel out, and we're left with just x over here, and 350 times 1 is 350. So it's 350 grams.